Hello learners, welcome to the course Migrated Women's Literature. In today's lecture, we would be talking about Indian migration, phases and causes. It is the second part. In the previous lecture, we had talked about Indian migration and its causes. We had discussed migration during pre-colonial era as well as colonial era. Now, we know that migration in the pre-colonial era was voluntary and was done with some political as well as personal reasons. But during the colonial era, migration was mostly forced. British took people from India to establish their other colonies. In Indian history, indentured laborers comprise the biggest Indian diaspora. Even after centuries, those memories, sufferings, and pain, and struggles could never be erased. Presently, the people from their families, their other generations are living as Indian diaspora abroad. People were taken on an agreement which read about all their work conditions, but later everything turned out to be fake promises. The Girmitias never returned home. Same had happened with the other laborers who had been taken from India during the British rule. In the annals of Indian history, those indentured laborers represent the largest segment of the Indian diaspora, their stories of struggle and survival forming a significant chapter in the broader narrative of Indian diaspora. Whenever we talk about Indian migration, we see that was a migration which gave them so many memories related to their sufferings and their struggles. They also had memories of their past life, the memories which they had brought from their homeland, the memories of their own stories, their myths, their traditions, their rituals and customs. And we also notice that these memories kept those migrants connected with their homeland. After the migration during the colonial era, now we would talk about migration in the post-colonial times. This migration was very much different from the previous one. People who migrated in the post-colonial era were mostly educated and knew their aims and objectives of migration. Let us discuss in detail migration in the post-colonial era. In the post-World War II era, the migration of Indian laborers and professionals became a global phenomenon. The third wave of migration to industrialized nations such as the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada began in the later stages of the British Raj, with Western countries providing new job prospects to some and educational chances to others. Simultaneously, migration to nations such as the United States, Canada, and Australia, where Indians had established themselves, was voluntary. Following Indian independence in 1947, there was a significant migration to the United States and Canada, primarily by Sikhs from various districts of Punjab. Initially, the migration to North America included ex-servicemen who had served with British forces overseas, such as in Hong Kong. As more opportunities were available, an increasing number of Indians migrated to Canada. They found work in railways, agriculture, dairying, and fruit packaging. As more Indians entered these industries, anti-Indian attitudes grew, prompting different regulations to curb the entry of Asians. The 1965 revisions to the United States Immigration and Nationality Act marked a watershed movement in immigration policy. These revisions prohibited discrimination based on country of origin and introduced three eligibility criteria for prospective migrants. Number one, occupational skills needed in the US. Second, family reunification. And third, political and religious refugees. Indian immigrants who arrived in the United States in the late 1960s and 70s were all educated. And until the 1980s, established a professional class that lived in diverse suburban regions with other middle class families. As a result, the family reunification program allowed them to sponsor their relatives for immigration. In contrast, the Indian population in Canada is more diversified, with both highly qualified professionals and semi-skilled rural migrants, owing partly to Canada's family sponsorship immigration program. Initially, the Canadian government carefully monitored immigration and imposed quotas to prevent the influx of Indians in the early 20th century. However, by the 1950s, Canada had adopted a more liberal attitude towards India to counter claims of racial discrimination, eventually embracing cultural variety as a distinguishing part of its identity. Many Indian migrants had to travel long distances in search of fresh possibilities. Some were from modest peasant households and had to mortgage their land to cover land taxes. Despite enduring challenges and discrimination in their new homes, these immigrants persisted, believing that the West offered prospects for a brighter future. Subsequent waves of Indian migrants moved to pursue better educational and job opportunities. Many hoped to return after gaining useful experience, earning advanced degrees, or reaching financial stability. However, in many situations, the return did not materialize for a variety of reasons, including adjustment to a better lifestyle, increased prospects for promotion, and professional fulfillment. However, most Indian Americans, as Singh writes in his book, kept their permanent resident status till their children grew up. They have excelled in education, information technology, and medicine. While many current generation Indians are doctors, the great majority works in the IT industry in same capacity. Aside from these professionals, there are working class populations of Gujarati shopkeepers and Punjabi cab drivers, hotel owners, retail shopkeepers, taxi drivers, salespeople, and manufacturing workers who earn a decent living. Today, the racial discrimination experienced by previous generations has significantly decreased. The first wave of immigrants to Canada encountered rampant racism from local white Canadians. There were racial riots against these immigrants. As a result, the most of them decided to return to India, leaving only a handful behind. Today, Indians in the United States and Canada form one of the largest diaspora communities, with approximately 2.5 million in the United States and more than 7 lakhs in Canada. They have achieved remarkable success in academia, information technology, and medicine. The second wave of Indian migration to Australia began after 1947, when India gained independence and included a considerable number of British and Anglo-Indians. Furthermore, the Whitlam Labour government's statement in 1972 that Australian immigration policy would be fully free of discrimination based on race, ethnicity, color, or nationality led in a significant increase in Asia-Pacific immigration. The next wave of Indian migration to Australia occurred in the early 1970s, after Australia abandoned its whites policy in 1973. And many white-collar workers and professionals came to reside there. They generally came from Punjab and Gujarat. With the change in communication technology, that is called IT boom, A considerable number of computer software specialists began migrating to Australia from 1976 onwards. From 1970 forward, the migrants were predominantly professionals. Indians in Australia maintain close ties with their home country by participating in economic transactions, such as sending a significant portion of their savings back home in the form of remittances to be invested in real estate, industrial establishments, small businesses, educational institutions, and to contribute to welfare activities such as charities, old age homes, famine or flood victims, and so on. Marriage is the foundation of any family and it is India's most important cultural symbol. Indians in Australia have stayed close knit, arranging their sons or daughters' marriage in the same way as they do in India. Indian community in Australia celebrate nearly all national, regional, local and religious festivals. The major Indian festivals celebrated with great pomp in Australia include Holi, Diwali, Eid, Dashera, Rakhi, Baisakhi, and Buddha Jayanti, among others. They also hold the Ganesh Visarjana festival with the assistance of local associations. Religious communities such as Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists have successfully transplanted their religious traditions and customs to Australia. Several spiritual leaders or gurus have established a foothold in Australia during the last few decades. A new wave of Indian immigration has begun, with major implications for the history of Indian migration to Australia. As a result of government assistance, Australian educational institutions attracted full fee paying overseas students. According to the High Level Committee report on Indian diaspora, the Indian population in Australia was estimated at 1,90,000 in 2004. Indians moved to Britain in the 1950s and 1960s to work as laborers. The Indian community in Britain is heterogeneous, consisting of early migrants, those who are in their 50s and 60s, East African Indians, well educated current migrants, and second generation Indians. Indians who went to work in low wage positions in the 1950s gradually migrated to some corner stores. 20 years later, they had evolved into larger businesses, making the Indian community one of the most successful minority groups in the country. The strong Indian ideals of families pooling their resources, both financial and personal, have played a vital role in their entrepreneurial success. Initially, workers migrated from Punjab, followed by Indians from the Caribbean and finally from East African countries. The early migrants settled in London, Birmingham, and Manchester. Most immigrants remained close to one another in order to maintain their independence from the local community, while still maintaining their feeling of identity. They also tried to replicate their rural culture, which resulted in their being a distinct group with strange customs. It was a hated and overlooked minority. However, its success has resulted in numerous viewpoint shifts over time. Racism against people of Indian heritage has been much diminished from the early days of widespread immigration after partition. Indian culture is constantly referenced in Greater British culture. Indian food is now considered a part of British cuisine. According to the April 2001 UK National Census, there are 10,51,800 persons of Indian descent in the UK. They are the most educated and economically successful of the South Asian immigrant communities, outperforming even the indigenous white or English. That's all for today. We will connect again in some other lectures. Thank you.